look yonder.
Hello and welcome. My name is MA, and today I'm going to be reading chapter 3 of Moby Porcelain. I've also made a playlist of all of his music that I love that you can see below, and let's just get into it because I'm so excited to see what happens next. So from before, if you haven't seen the last videos, go check them out. That is your loss, not mine. But pretty much Moby lives in a factory. Got a gig in New York, and he was a bad Christian, but then he got vegan cookies, and he's like, oh, it's all about the little things. So that's a super fast non-recap. So go watch the videos. So chapter 3 is called Night Moves. And also, if you haven't noticed, we are in a different setup today because I feel like shit and it is storming outside and I didn't want to sit in a chair. I want to just snuggle in bed. So here we are in bed. My dog is somewhere at the other end. My fish Pablo is in the back. Hey Pablo. Warhol might come cuddle depending on how he feels, but right now he's just sitting looking at me very sad. Oh, he just winked. We're good. All right. Chapter 3, Night Moves. You can't be a DJ in New York and live in Stratford, Damien had said to me correctly. But I can't afford to live in Manhattan, I complained. Well, move to New York and get more DJ jobs, he told me. He was right. I was scared and poor, but he was right. So he and I were clearing out my tiny space at the abandoned factory. Leaving behind my plywood walls and scavenged door, I packed everything I owned into my mom's car and moved to New York City with Damien, his girlfriend Alyssa, and our DJ friend Roberto. I met Damien 2 years before at an all-ages club in Greenwich where I was DJing. He was a tall, blonde, aspiring artist. He smoked expensive British cigarettes and always wore black New Wave clothes. Every New Wave girl in Connecticut was in love with him. He couldn't afford art school, so he spent his time in different art museums figuring out how people had painted in the 18th century. His girlfriend, Alyssa, was a tall, mantis-thin Asian model who had just graduated from Columbia. Our friend Roberto was a hip-hop DJ whose parents were modern art dealers. Roberto dated beautiful women, DJed at downtown hip-hop clubs, and vacationed in the south of France in his family's villa. A few weeks ago, Alyssa had been looking at apartments in the Village Voice ads. She found a duplex on the corner of 14th Street and 3rd Avenue with 3 bedrooms and a big living room for $1,200 a month. Lower Manhattan was filled with cheap apartments because Lower Manhattan was filthy and dangerous, and most people didn't want to live there. Damien and Alyssa were dysfunctionally dating, so they claimed the largest bedroom in the basement. Their bedroom got no light and smelled like cheap building materials and mildew. Because it was perpetually dark, or maybe because they hated each other, they were depressed. Alyssa and Damien both routinely slept until 3 or 4 in the afternoon. Roberto had the most money, being a working DJ and having a villa and gallery-owning parents. So he took the large bedroom in the back of the apartment that actually got 30 minutes of sunlight during the afternoon. I was the poorest, so I took the smallest bedroom. But it was still bigger than my 100 square foot cube at the abandoned factory. The floors in my new bedroom were painted gray. My walls were faded green, and it had 2 grimy windows overlooking the garbage-filled shaftway between our building and the one next to ours. My box of books were on the floor, and my records were piled in the corner. I removed the closet doors and installed my small MIDI studio in the closet. I couldn't afford a bed frame, so my thin twin mattress sat on the floor. The apartment smelled like garbage. It got no light, and it was next door to a drug den and a Mexican restaurant specializing in deep-fried churritos, but for me, it was paradise. New York City had long been the dark city on the hill for me, shadowy, anonymous, and perfect. I'd been born on 148th Street in Harlem in 1965 and spent years in Connecticut dreaming of returning to New York, like the homing pigeon longing for the degenerate island of its birth. Gang violence and AIDS and drug overdoses weren't just tabloid headlines for us. We all knew people who had died way too young in New York City. Nevertheless, Damien, I, and our roommates were in the filthy epicenter of the most remarkable city on the planet. My share of the rent was $285, which was a huge stretch for me, since I'd previously been paying $50 a month to the security guard at the abandoned factory. But I was almost making $800 a month, and I was DJing at Mars and saying yes to any work that was offered to me. The week before moving to the city, I had borrowed my mom's car to drive across the Tapansi Bridge to Nyack, New York, where I DJed a wedding. The bride and groom were getting married without the blessing of their families, so they had to rent the basement of the Nyack Community Hall and pay for it themselves. The basement was cold and damp, and the 20 guests sat shivering on plastic folding chairs. The couple couldn't afford to rent turntables, so I played music on the 2-casket desk they borrowed from their friends, even playing Wedding March on a cast single as the bride walked down the aisle between the folding chairs. They paid me $70, and I felt guilty taking so much money. But one of my goals in New York City was to avoid becoming a homeless prostitute, and to do that, I needed to do anything that I could to make money, even DJing weddings with cassettes and taking money from impoverished newlyweds. A month after my roommate and I moved in, we decided to have a party. I played new wave and house music records and cassettes in the corner of the living room. People danced, and everyone except me got drunk. I had stopped drinking 2 years before, in 1987. I had my first drink when I was 10 years old, on the last day of 1975. My friend Arthur's family lived in Darien, on an estate by Long Island Sound, and his mom had invited me to their New Year's Eve party. At some point during the night, Arthur's drunk mom had handed me a glass of champagne. I'd then gone to their huge marble-clad kitchen and stolen 2 more glasses of champagne from under the noses of 2 European au pairs they had working for them. After I drank 3 glasses of champagne, all my anxieties had melted away, and for the first time in my life, I had felt genuinely happy. When I made it upstairs to Arthur's room after midnight, Arthur was already asleep on the lower bunk of his bunk beds. I drunkenly climbed on the top bunk and laid down under the Battlestar Galactica blanket. "I always wanted to feel this good," I announced to the room. Arthur didn't say anything. He was sleeping. In junior high school and high school, I went to parties and drank anything I could get my hands on. I stole wine and beer from my mom and her boyfriends. I stole vodka and rum from the liquor cabinets of my friends' parents. And to top it off, when I was 12, my friend Jim and I would drink wine coolers to take the antipsychotic pills prescribed for his institutionalized brother. "I'm an alcohol enthusiast," I tell my friends. Sometimes at the very moment when I was hurling garbage cans at parked cars, drunkenly peeing or throwing up on a sidewalk. I drunkenly crashed a few cars and lost my virginity in a blackout when I was 16. I would also get drunk to go to straight edge shows. Straight edge was a movement that had started by the DC hardcore band Minor Threat. Most straight edge kids wore big X's on the back of their hands and didn't drink, smoke, or take drugs. I loved the music, and I loved feeling like I was part of a secret society. But I was a teenager. I had no interest in the actual philosophy. When I was 17, I went to see Minor Threat at the Great Gildersleeves, a rock club in Lower Manhattan, 1 block away from the CBGB. I drew the requisited X on the back of my hand, and on the way to the venue got drunk on rum with my friend Bill. In a blackout state after the show, I introduced myself to Ian MacKaye, lead singer of Minor Threat. He was loading equipment into the band's van. "Mr. MacKaye," I said drunkenly, "I just wanted to say that I'm straight edge too. I love your band." He shook my hand and said a wary thanks. In 1983, I went to college and kept drinking, routinely waking up on the floor of my dorm room in a puddle of my own vomit. I also began having debilitating panic attacks. They were so bad I couldn't leave my dorm room or make it to class, so I dropped out and moved home. My friends from high school were at Ivy League schools sitting under 100-year-old oak trees and discussing Kant and Foucault. And a year after graduating high school, I was a 19-year-old college dropout sleeping on his mother's secondhand couch. Even though I was 19, and under the legal drinking age. I got a job GJing at a suburban bar called The Beat. At other bars, being blind drunk at work might have been frowned upon, but at The Beat, my bosses seemed to turn a blind eye to me drinking as often and as much as I could. I would drink a pint of vodka, throw up alcohol and stomach bile in the men's room, and then get a beer and head to the DJ booth to get back to work. I was young, so the hangovers had been brief and almost charming. They made me feel kinship with Dylan Thomas and Charles Bukowski. But consequences started to pile up from drinking in 1986. At the age of 21, I accepted that I might be an alcoholic, or at least a problem drinker. In 1987, I became vegan, started teaching Bible study, and decided that crashing cars and waking up covered in vomit wasn't in keeping with my values. My father had died of alcoholism. My friend Paul's mom had died of alcoholism. Most of the violence I had seen had been fueled by drinking. So I sat on the couch of my mom's house in 1987 and called up Paul, who had always been straight edge. I told him, "I think I'm done. I don't think I'm going to drink anymore." I hadn't had a drink since, and our shared sobriety and mutual love of Star Trek and David Lynch had become the foundation of my friendship with Paul. At 2 a.m., a housewarming party at our new apartment started winding down, so I turned on the light and ended the night with a cassette of Night Moves by Bob Seger. My drunk friends sang along, finishing their beers and heading home. I went to bed and set my alarm for 7 a.m., so I could wake up and collect all the empty cans and bottles before anyone threw them away. After I slept for a few hours, I woke up at dawn and filled 3 garbage bags with bottles and cans and lugged them down 14th Street to the Food Emporium. Even early in the morning, there were a dozen homeless people standing in line outside the supermarket, all waiting to use the recycling machine. It was a cold March morning. I was wearing a Vietnam-era army jacket, thrift shop jeans, old work boots, and a black knit cap pulled over my head. It was starting to drizzle. My plastic garbage bag smelled like beer, and the people walking in and out of the Food Emporium were giving me and the homeless people in line pitying looks. When it was my turn to patiently insert my bottles and cans into the recycling machine, each time I was rewarded with a loud crunch of 5 cents that clattered into the metal tray. After a few minutes, my bags were empty and my pockets were full of nickels. I had made $5 in loose change and I felt rich. All I'd done was wake up early, collect garbage that would have been thrown away. I'd put the garbage into a machine and the machine had given me the money. I felt like an alchemist, but instead of turning lead into gold, I turned beer bottles into nickels. It was 9 a.m. and I was newly rich with nickels, so I headed for Prana Health Foods at First Avenue. Prana was the only health food store in my new neighborhood, and it hadn't changed since 1970. It smelled like oats and brewer's yeast and stale spinach, and everyone who worked there was surly and thin and looked like a refugee from the Grateful Dead parking lot show. They even had the requisite hippie cap sleeping on the bulk sesame seed bin. I splurged on my favorite luxury indulgence, vanilla soy milk, which was $1.49 per carton. While the cranky hippie behind the counter watched, I counted out $4.90 in nickels and bought 3 containers of soy milk and an organic orange. Now I was an alchemist twice over. I had turned beer cans and bottles into soy milk and an orange. I walked up First Avenue and got home just as my roommates were waking up. Roberto was staggering around the kitchen in his Calvin Klein underpants and Adidas sandals, hungover. "You cleaned up?" he asked, confused. "I took all the bottles and cans to the recycling place at the Food Emporium," I said proudly. "Ha! You're like a homeless dude," he said. I wanted to brag that I now had 3 cartons of soy milk and an orange, but his family owned a villa in Providence, so I didn't think he'd be impressed. "Yo, what was that whack rock track you played at the end of the party?" he asked. "Night Moves by Bob Seger?" I asked. "That shit was whack." I wanted to defend Bob, but I said nothing. I just put away my groceries, Roberto had grown up in New York, and he understood cool things in a way that I never would. We were both DJs, but he loved obscure jazz and cozy burger, and then I loved Bob and soy milk. Yo, can I have some of your orange? Roberto asked. My orange? It had cost me 40 cents, or 8 cans. Okay, I said. It's organic. As opposed to synthetic? I peeled the orange and we sat down on our strained futon to play Mario Bros. On the Nintendo. Are you DJing at Mars tonight? He asked. Yeah, in the basement. Clark Kent's on the main floor and Red Alert's on the second floor. Oh, word. Can't you put me on the list? Sure. You plus two? Yeah, thanks, he said. We sat on the futon eating my organic orange and watching Mario leap around the giant mushroom. I looked at the gray tenement wall across the shaftway from our apartment and smiled. For the first time since 1967, I was a New Yorker. And that's it! So that's him moving to New York. I feel like that chapter was not as long as previous chapters we've read. That was awesome! I can't wait to read chapter 4, which is going to be Hands in the Air. And if you like this, make sure to like and subscribe. I feel like shit, so every like is like sending me a virtual orange so I can get better. Because oranges are full of vitamin C, and that's what I need right now. That rhymes. So I hope you're doing well and have an awesome day. And until next time, bye.
You guys are still here. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that video, and remember to like and subscribe.